In addition to having one of popular music's most impressive studio discographies, Bob Dylan also has one of its most impressive shadow catalogs, if you will, his live albums and extensive bootleg series. Most artists' live albums are pretty straightforward renderings of what they did in the studio, plus some applause between songs. Not so with Bob Dylan. On his live albums, Bob Dylan doesn't just perform his material, he remakes it. Ever since Before the Flood in 1974, his live albums have featured rearrangement and rewriting of very well-known songs. And the Bootleg Series is similar. Since 1991, it's brought to light hundreds of original songs and live performances that previously only circulated on fan bootlegs. Fun fact, Bob Dylan was actually the first rock artist to be bootlegged on 1969's The Great White Wonder. It was a double album featuring early recordings, radio interviews, and songs that would later see official release on the Basement Tapes. By my count, Bob's Shadow catalog features 24 discrete collections, 7 live albums, and 17 Bootleg Series installments, some of which are live albums. 24 collections is more extensive than many artists' studio discographies, so I felt this deserved its own tier list. A couple quirks of my inclusion criteria. I combined the 2 short live performances released in 2005 into a single collection. I'm counting In Concert Brandeis University 1963 as part of the Bootleg Series Volume 9. And I'm excluding everything in the Copyright Extension collection, which consists of recordings released solely to extend their copyright. So, viewers looking for a list ranking of all 40 concerts captured in the live 1974 recordings will have to look elsewhere, and maybe in the mirror. Before we get going, I have a very fun announcement. I'm starting a Patreon. I've got a pretty robust musical life here in Brooklyn. I write and perform my own material, I reinterpret Bob Dylan's material, I collaborate with a lot of the city's best musicians, and I create commentary videos like this. And I'm gonna start sharing more of it with the world via Patreon. This includes live stream concerts, a podcast with Brooklyn's best up-and-coming singer-songwriters, even more Dylan and maybe other artist commentary, and monthly Ask Me Anything videos where you can ask me anything. My favorite Dylan bootlegs, what it's like to be a DIY musician, what my song Searching for My Twin means, or why my cardigan game is so strong. If that interests you, click the link in the video description to learn more. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to my page. YouTube pays me by how well I engage my audience, so interacting with my content is like putting $1 in my digital tip jar at no cost to you. It goes farther than you might think. Okay, more Dylan, more tier listing. Let's go. 1. Before the Flood. I think it's easy to forget how big a deal this was at the time. Dylan had not toured in 8 years. If you were a big Dylan fan in the late 60s and early 70s, you sort of just thought you might never see him again. I can put myself in the shoes of somebody back then who would have cared and would have worried. And then when he went back on the road, it would have been a revelation. He made this album with the band who had been his de facto backing band since 1965. Most likely You Go Your Way and I'll Go Mine is an excellent opener. The way that he articulates the chorus in Rainy Day Women has always been exciting to me. The other thing that's great about this show is Dylan's acoustic portion. The rearrangement of Don't Think Twice, It's Alright, I've always adored. The highlight of the entire record might be It's Alright Ma. His guitar playing is so thunderous, as is the audience response to it. The thing that I don't love about this album is that it's kind of just a greatest hits album live. If you had sort of blindly predicted the track list at this point in his career, you wouldn't have been that far off. Every song of his, pretty much, that had been a radio hit is here in some form or fashion. That ranges from Blowin' in the Wind all the way up to Knockin' on Heaven's Door, which had come out the year before. What keeps most of the Dylan material here interesting is that it's rearranged and that his voice is suddenly different. It's deeper and more resonant and more of a bellow than his voice in any of the previous iterations of his career. And he sings the songs differently, he phrases the songs differently, there's a different energy in each of his songs. I cannot say the same for the band's songs. It's a great sort of illustration of what separates Dylan live stuff from other artists' live stuff. The band stuff sounds more or less the way it does on their albums, with a crowd. It feels a little bit perfunctory. Whereas the Dylan stuff is at least rearranged, or at least resung, or at least performed in the new iteration of Dylan. And so it's interesting. And so it's worth investigating just on that level. The pluses of the album are excellent energy, revelatory, I'm sure, at the time, exciting that Dylan was back. I don't listen to this album very much all the way through. It's long. The arrangements are not, they don't feel essential to me in terms of, what has made Dylan a great rearranger of his own work, unlike some of the next albums, which do. There are cuts on it that I think are excellent. On the whole, I would probably put this in his B tier. 2. Hard Rain, the first official document of the Rolling Thunder Review. The stuff on Before the Flood is somewhat rearranged. The stuff on Hard Rain is very, very, very rearranged. He came up with an entirely new riff motif for Maggie's Farm, which is no less energetic or vindictive than the original one felt. There is a lot of rewriting in this album. Idiot Wind has some new lyrics. You're a Big Girl Now has some new lyrics. Lay Lady Lay has some new lyrics. There's subtle things, like the chorus of Stuck Inside a Mobile, he extends the last syllable of again in harmony with another singer. And it's a cool effect. The song is not rearranged dramatically outside of that, but it's a little thing that just adds a new sort of twist to that song, which again is just indicative of Dylan's obsession with finding new wrinkles of value. I use this metaphor advisedly. I feel like a lot of the arrangements on this album are almost like sadomasochistic. And hear me out. Lay Lady Lay and I Threw It All Away are kind of the ones that I'm thinking about when I say that. He sort of draws them out as long as possible and just shouts his way through them. And the instrumentation is so... every hit is muscular, like every hit on the drums is emphasized and is harsh, the singing is harsh, the playing is harsh. It feels like him starting this sort of sadomasochistic relationship with playing his own material. There's a mutual, it will suffer and he will enjoy, and it will enjoy and he will suffer about it all. I've never put it in those terms before, but I think there's something to that. Because all of the songs are played with a similar level of intensity, whether they're upbeat or whether they're sort of mid-tempo. Because of that similar intensity, it gets a little bit enervating to me. Like I'm a little bit tired by the time this album is done. I just feel like I've been ravaged in a way as a listener, especially after Idiot Wind, the 10.5-minute version of Idiot Wind. Like, as if that song wasn't long enough, they slowed it down even more. Dylan the Brutalist. This album is a little bit Dylan the Brutalist. So zooming out, like in addition to the arrangements being good and a lot of the music being exciting and interesting and fun, there does seem to be a broader philosophical thing happening here, just in the way that they're rearranged, in that sort of brutal energy that a lot of these songs have. It's like when you put a rug up against the wall and just start beating it to get the dust out of it. Like that's how it felt to me. And that's interesting that he would choose to present the songs in that sort of way is interesting. In general, this is both fun and interesting to listen to. I think I'm ultimately partial to the first leg of the Rolling Thunder review. I think by now you can feel people getting a little bit exhausted, but this is like a thoroughly cool and interesting live album. To the extent that Dylan coming up with new ways to deliver the energy of existing songs interests you like it interests me, this is an interesting listen. On the whole, I think I would put this in his A tier. 3. Bob Dylan at Budokan. Boy, do I not like this album. It's funny, there are Dylan fans who love this year, love everything he did in 1978. It seems like more people love Street Legal than don't, but I really don't like it. And then this album, man, what happened? If you've never heard this album, basically what's going on is he adopted the Neil Diamond approach to performing, where he built as big a band as he possibly could and develop these sort of Las Vegas-y type arrangements of the songs. It feels very kitschy. Like you can feel the casino lights just blinking on and off as the pan flute in Mr. Tambourine Man is being played. It's crazy. The arrangements are very precise. There's rarely a hair out of place, instrumentally speaking. Yeah, there's not that characteristic looseness that usually is felt on Dylan albums in general, which to me is a big loss. I just feel like part of the Dylan ethos is that things cannot happen the same way twice. You can never step in the same river twice. And so the fact that these performances are so consistent and rote, and the dynamics are so similar, the instrumental parts are so similar, it feels like it compromises what to me is maybe the most interesting part of the Dylan ethos, if not an essential part of the Dylan ethos. I don't like the approach, and so it's hard for me to listen through the arrangements and critique them specifically because the approach is so unappealing to me. It's like, there's a reason I'm not a huge Neil Diamond fan. I don't dislike Neil Diamond. Just to be clear, I don't dislike him, but he's not one of my artistic North Stars, sort of for that reason, for the reason of insisting on precision. It's just, you wonder what was going through his head. I theorized there were a couple of things going through his head. Elvis had just died the year before. And so part of me has always wondered whether he was trying to resurrect late career Elvis, because Elvis's arrangements at the end were very like this. It was a big band. It was maximalist arrangements that were very precise. And then the other thing is that Neil Diamond was huge in those days. There's a story from The Last Waltz where Neil Diamond and Bob Dylan were both guests, where Neil Diamond did his set to rapturous applause and then walked backstage and said to Bob Dylan something to the effect of, follow that, or those are my people, or something like that. Dylan is suggestible, maybe that got in his head and he wanted to out Diamond Neil Diamond. There are a lot of possible ways to account for this, but I'm just not a fan. I'm not a fan. The last thing I'll say about this is that, I used to listen a lot to Bob Dylan bootlegs, and the concert recordings from the end of 1978 are quite good. This one was recorded, I think, in February of 1978. It was like one of the first jaunts that this particular band had. Listening to early recordings from this year versus late recordings, you can hear how much more confident the band got in performing. Again, the method of performance is still not one that I love, but the band did get much more confident in doing this kind of performance. I wish they'd waited a little bit and released that, because it would have been a better album. I'm not a fan of this. I don't like the philosophy. I'm more interested by the philosophy in almost everything else Dylan has done than the 1978 philosophy writ large. I never listened to it. I don't like it. It's tiresome. Yeah, sorry. I'm really not a fan. I would put this in his D tier. 4. Real Live. So by contrast to 1978, I've always liked the 1983-1984 Dylan vibe. I love about half the album Infidels, which is why I think I put it in the B tier in that tier list. But he had wrangled something artistically cool on Infidels, and when the songs were in that groove, it's some of his most essential material, I think, and material that not a lot of people are that well versed in, but they would benefit to be well versed in. I've always kind of had a soft spot for this album. I don't consider it his best live album. I don't really rank it among his best live performances in general. Like, some of the arrangements are a little bit cardboard. The arrangements for the mid-60s blues songs that he put on this album are all kind of the same. Highway 61, Maggie's Farm, and Tombstone Blues, like they're kind of interchangeable. I do think it's interesting that Maggie's Farm is a song that he constantly played live and is maybe the most rearranged song in his canon. The one on Hard Rain is its own kind of way. The one on Real Live is its own kind of way. The one on Budokan is its own kind of way. The one from Newport 65 is its own kind of way. And there are more. He's rearranged this song constantly throughout his career. This album is maybe where a particular kind of Dylan stereotype emerged, which is him singing in that, I ain't gonna work on Maggie's Farm no more. Not bad, right? His phrasing on this album, maybe more than anywhere else in his career, is that sort of up, nasally up on every syllable just about. Like, listen to Girl from the North Country. And it rolls and flows on down a bridge. When I was listening to this again recently, in particular on Maggie's Farm, it almost felt like a punk decision to sing it that way. The way that punk singing, where it stays on just a pitch or a couple of pitches, feels almost inherently protestful, like protestful of, commercial expectations or conventional expectations of beauty, of vocal beauty. The singing here kind of has that same quality to me. Yes, I think most people will hear it and just sort of scoff at it and say, oh, that's just Dylan being ridiculously Dylan. And yes, on some level it is. But I think it has the same ethos, again, as that punk singing, where it's like, I don't care what you think is beautiful. I don't care. And I'm going to do this in the way that I want to do this. That bravado, that sort of contrarian bravado, while presenting terrific sets of lyrics with some very fine musicianship, feels cool, feels good. I like it. There are a few true highlights here. I is a true highlight. He sings I with more conviction and confidence than he does on the record, and that's worth hearing. I've always been very charmed by the It Ain't Me Babe performance, the audience getting very into Dylan's sort of mantra-like harmonica solos. The standout fascinating piece of this record is the rewrite of Tangled Up in Blue. He changes a lot. He changes the vocal melody a little bit. He changes the point of view a little bit. He writes a lot of new lyrics to the song. Some of the lyrics have that quality of misguided 80s Dylan lyrics where, like, get on that train and ride. Like it feels like Dylan trying to be a cool 80s guy, which is arguably the nadir of his public image. The confidence to rewrite a song that is a classic and perform it in a new way. I'm just, again, artistically, I'm so gratified by that decision. To not just accept what's worked in the past, but to look at what's worked and say, maybe this could work differently or work better, and in any case, I should try regardless of whether my experiment is successful. That's the kind of artist that I want to be. I don't want to be the kind of artist who finds something that works and then just drives it into the ground. There are some essential pieces of this album. The artistic pinnacle of this album is the Tangled Up in Blue. To have heard most of the rest of it once is to have heard it enough. But I do think it is an album that you should hear once or twice, maybe even 3 times. I would put this just below Before the Flood in the B tier. 5, Dylan and the Dead. This one. Oh man, there's so much that I don't understand about this album. So again, if you're a Dylan fan, you know that he every so often likes to desecrate his own image. Self-Portrait was that. Going Electric, I think you could argue, was that. Maybe 1978, the year that I despise, was that. Boy, if this isn't a desecration, I don't know what is. The way that I kind of explain how Hard Rain, the live album, feels to me is that it's kind of like a sadomasochistic rendering of a lot of his classic songs. This is like taking classic material and like throwing it onto a highway for cars to just drive over and over and over and flatten and tarnish. What is done to these songs is so brutal. To say that Dylan forgets the lyrics would be an understatement. It's like he's fading in and out of consciousness. Like he kind of becomes conscious and remembers a lyric, and then you can just hear him mumbling his way through a verse where he doesn't remember the lyric and can't really be bothered to try. On one level, like, he's not doing a faithful rendering of the lyrics, and what lyrics he is remembering, he's not singing well. There are recordings circulating of Dylan's 1986 tour with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and he performs those songs with a lot of clarity and conviction. Something happened between 1986 and 1987 where he lost that clarity, he lost that conviction. I mean, frankly, he just sounds like a drunk, and he probably was. That's probably what's going on here. He's probably too drunk to remember or to be bothered to remember. And then the other just perplexing thing about this is Joey, which to my mind is maybe the worst Bob Dylan song. You know, a completely wrong-headed tribute to a psychopathic murdering mafia dude. He does not forget a word of Joey. There's a moment in one of the verses where he mixes up 2 of the lines, but he has the presence of mind to notice that he mixed them up and then substitute the next line for the one that should have gone before it. So, like, not only does he remember almost all the lyrics to this very, very long song, but he makes a conscientious correction in the middle of it. And so, for some reason, he really cared about singing that song well, but not Gotta Serve Somebody, or not Queen Jane Approximately. It's just, it's like, what happened? Why? How do you account for that? It's a microcosm for this whole album. It's hard to watch. It's hard to watch. I think if I had been a Dylan fan in these years, I would have thought, like, wow, man, this is the end. Like, this might be the end of my idol. I think it would have been sad. I think I would have been really sad. Listening to it now and knowing how he sort of resurrected his inspiration, You can see it as a sort of peculiar stumbling block. This is a terrible album. I'm sorry. It's terrible. Again, I think the only thing that redeems this is that air of intentional desecration, and thinking about what that is. Why somebody would do this. Maybe he just has a low opinion of himself in these years, and he's like, I've lost it. I don't got it. And maybe he just felt like he needed to drink away his self-doubt. He's just immortal. People go through stuff like that. The only pleasure in this album is morbid pleasure. The dead cannot resurrect the momentarily dead career and inspiration of Bob Dylan. What's funny is I actually like this more than Budokan. For all of Dylan and the Dead's disgustingness, disgusting performances and song choices and everything, it still feels more essentially Dylan than Budokan does. Budokan just feels like essentially Diamond. And that's not what I'm here for. I would rank it just above Budokan in the D tier. 6. The Bootleg Series Volume 1. Volume 1 takes us roughly through the freewheelin' sessions with a couple of songs from the Times Era Change-In sessions. What is captured in Volume 1 is one of the most fertile periods of Bob Dylan's career. He had not written a ton of original material before this. He had written some, but not a ton. And from 1961 through 1963 or so, he still did it after, but through those 2 years, he began doing the artistic thing of taking folk song melodies and writing his own lyrics to them. Almost every song on this first installment of the Bootleg Series is that. The structure of this album is more as a subject of study for the very interested Dylan fan. Volume 1 alone has 22 songs. It's not really something that you listen to front to back. It's almost more of a reference text. It's like an encyclopedia installment. It's probably wrong to evaluate it in the way that you would evaluate a more typical album. So the question is like, is this an encyclopedia that you want on your bookshelf? And for somebody like me, absolutely. This is an essential resource to have at one's disposal. Part of why that is because it is a further tracing of how the legendary poet Bob Dylan came to be the legendary poet, how he started as an interpreter and became a legendary poet. This is trying to describe that arc, the important, poetic moments along that arc that led to the consummation of his poetic powers. It absolutely does that. A lot of these songs figure very prominently in the way that I think about Bob Dylan. Hard Times in New York Town is similar to Song to Woody. In and of itself, it's not a grand poetic or folk statement, but it's a very, very competent rendering of a folk style that predated him. I would put He Was a Friend of Mine in that category, which he didn't write, but it's a similar kind of theme. Man on the Street, House Carpenter, Talkin' Bear Mountain Picnic, Massacre Blues shows his humorous side. His early performing style was funny. It was Chaplin-esque. He was puckish on stage, and that was part of his early appeal. And there's a lot of songs here that show that. There are some songs that, in and of themselves, irrespective of what they have to tell us about the context of the poet Bob Dylan, are just great. Kingsport Town is one. It's a traditional song that he sort of lightly rewrote, but his performance of it is gorgeous. The recording is gorgeous. Moonshiner shows his ability to cast a melancholic spell live. The harmonica playing is incredibly tasteful. The singing is incredibly tasteful. If you're only going to ever listen to one thing from this album, I would make it Last Thoughts on Woody Guthrie. He had a big show at Town Hall in 1963. He delivers this long poetic tribute to Woody Guthrie that's beautiful. Listening to somebody discourse and create from a point of admiration, from a catalyst of artistic admiration, to me is extraordinarily moving, because I get it. Last Thoughts on Woody Guthrie is like hearing what Woody Guthrie's music does to Bob Dylan's psyche, where it makes his muse want to take him. The sensuous and fertile and sad but hopeful roads and plains of America, and just wanting there to be something more than the crass commercialism that he sees all around him. Wanting there to be something more than that. Wanting there to be a vision like the one expressed in This Land Is Your Land, or like the one expressed in Pastures of Plenty. Wanting that to be the case. It's beautiful. It's really a beautiful poem. If you're somebody inclined to build a Dylan encyclopedia, you must have this. It is every bit as essential to understanding him as an artist as Columbia would like you to believe that it is. It is. It's not an exhilarating listen front to back. It's better as a reference text than an album in and of itself, which is not the case for every Bootleg Series installment. Some of them are great, beginning, middle, end dynamic, listenable collections. This one is a little bit less so, but that does not make it any less of an essential Dylan document. I would put it just above Hard Rain in the A tier. Just in these 6, you can begin to illustrate the changing philosophy toward releasing unofficial or non-canonical Dylan material. The live album was always sort of a semi-artistic at best way to make more money off of an artist's exploits. There are exceptions to that, like Live at Leeds is a terrific live album, Live at the Apollo by James Brown. There are exceptions to that where the live albums are essential, but it was rarely the case back then. Most live albums were just them doing it plus some applause. Dylan's live albums mostly have more elaborate artistic motivations than just that. There comes this transition between him just doing what other artists were doing and releasing live albums to him taking a little bit more of an archaeologist's approach to releasing new material. Dylan just does not have a lot of peers whose attic is as full of terrific material as their living rooms. You know, most artists' best work is framed in their living room, not boxed in the attic. And a lot of Dylan's best work is boxed up in the attic and takes a project like this to justify. There's a lot more cool stuff in this series to cover, so stay tuned. If you want to support me and you want to make it a little bit easier for me to create this content and to flourish in my musical milieu, then check out the Patreon page. Please like this video, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.